Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. This is in no way intended to be political, but a lot of people have been asking me about this latest Tax the Rich movement. Although it might not be so Tesla related, it is economics related, so we're going to explore the economics of taxing the rich. Inequality is a word being thrown around a lot, particularly now we have so many rich people whose lives appear to be so much better than everyone else's. I mean, for example, it wouldn't even make any difference to Elon Musk's lifestyle if he gave away $1 billion to people more in need, but it would have a huge impact on their lives. Even if it meant 1 million poor people received $1,000 each, it could still have a big impact on their lives. We aren't continually hearing about the rich publicly donating their wealth to help the poor. Therefore, that means they're selfish and greedy, as they have so much, and the rest of us have so little comparatively. Except, of course, the likes of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and a lot of other fairly renowned wealthy people in history, like Andrew Carnegie, who donated the majority of his wealth when he sold Carnegie Steel, and literally had more cash than anyone has ever had in history, adjusted for inflation. But the rest of them simply have too much money and should give some of it back. Well, I thought I'd just go through some of this using only facts, no biased statistics, and see if we can work out what this is really about. Now, a lot of you have probably heard the cliche capitalist pig responses as to why they are rich and you are poor, but they end up just sounding like a rich person justifying their level of wealth discrepancy over people who have less. So let's really try and be realistic here with no biases. Okay, let's get started. To begin with, a lot of people think it's so simple. You just raise taxes on the rich and then the governments will have more money to distribute fairly amongst the citizens, namely the poor. But it doesn't work quite like that. For example, what if we were taxed 100%? Would we even bother working? Probably not. What about 90% or 80% tax? It just doesn't really seem worth working for. Those rates are just insane. Well, there was actually a 70% tax bracket in the US back in the 70s. There is something called supply-side economics though, something Reagan and Maggie Thatcher understood, using neoliberalism economics. For example, imagine a surgeon. The more hours he works, the more money he earns. The more money he earns, the higher tax bracket his income reaches, until eventually he's at 70% tax, for example. In other words, every extra hour he works, he now only brings in 30 cents on the dollar, so he's less motivated to work. Therefore, there are less surgeons doing surgery, less professionals all around the workforce doing less work, as they earn relatively less the more hours they work. For a nation, these are the people you want working the most. Not only do they add the most value to the economy, but anyone working with them also gets to share from their human capital and learn from their experience. The less these professionals are working, then the less knowledge is also being shared and proliferated through the economy. But anyway, these professionals simply work less hours as a result of the higher tax, and end up paying about the same amount of tax as when the tax rates were lower, except now we have less surgeons available. But these are higher earning employees. These are not the real rich people, the investors and business owners. That's where the wealth is. Well, if you add 5% extra tax to a rich person, then that's going to be about the same budget they'll use on finding ways of paying less tax. So instead of the rich investing in growing their businesses to grow and hire more employees, well, instead they invest in their accountants to find ways of getting around paying extra tax. Or if you tax them too much, they might simply leave the country. You don't want your rich people leaving the country. We hear they should be paying their fair share of tax, thrown around so much, and we're led to think that it's not fair. I work an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. These rich people are earning millions and not paying any tax. Is this true? Well, what decides a fair share of tax? The current proportions are the top 0.1% pay 20% of all tax. The top 1%, they pay 40%, and the top 10% pay 70% of all tax. Obviously, these groups benefit from government spending the least too. But the top 1% actually only account for 20% of all income, yet they have to pay 40% of all taxes. Yes, there are plenty of rich people who find unethical ways of avoiding tax. The majority are creating businesses that also offering employment too. They create jobs. These employees also pay tax. They're developing property for people to live in and businesses to grow. People think of rich people as mean, and sure, perhaps some are, and there are mean poor people too. Many do give to charities and help others where they can. And some people say the rich are entitled to all that wealth. They possibly worked hard for it. The thing is though, that a lot of the rich, well, they also start with opportunities that average people don't get. They get better education, better network of contacts to progress their career, a more structured family life, more attention from parents. If you have to start your career in debt, it can obviously be a lot harder to invest or save. If you want to start a new business, it helps knowing people with capital. This is what needs to be addressed, as much equal opportunity as possible, so that as many great minds as possible have the opportunity to follow their dreams. Even if you gave money to the poor, it wouldn't even help them for long. A lot of them simply don't have the financial education or know-how. In fact, the more you help them, the worse it becomes, as the more they depend on financial support. Financial education should obviously be taught at school. But this is not a video on how to remove inequality. We're just exploring the economics of taxing the rich. But anyway, we aren't even talking about the majority of these people. We're talking about the billionaires. We should just limit their net worth to $100 million. That is more than enough. And the rest of their wealth should be given to... Right, yeah. What's done with the rest of that money? Is it evenly distributed to all remaining non-billionaire citizens? Is it simply just consumed by the government, perhaps? For starters, whenever anything goes through the government, it simply becomes less efficient and more expensive. But the real factor is the economic cost. Say, for example, the government said the rich have to give 1% of their net worth as tax each year. So perhaps $2 billion a year from the likes of Elon. I don't think people even realise where billionaires' wealths lie. They aren't living like Scrooge McDuck with a massive building full of gold bullion and cash. It's all invested in assets. For example, if Elon was to pay this tax, he would have to sell a reasonable amount of Tesla stock in order to do so. Oh no, Elon has to sell 1 or 2% of his Tesla shares. The market doesn't like that, and it reacts, and Tesla's stock price drops 2%. You see? Elon has to pay the government $2 billion, but as he's selling Tesla stock to achieve that, the market reacts and drops over $10 billion of Tesla's stock price. So the government gets $2 billion, but it costs Tesla shareholders $10 billion plus Elon's $2 billion. Then that money goes through the government and about 30 cents on the dollar goes into its intended cause. So $600 million would have gone out as government spending to improve schools for the poor, but at a cost to society of $12 billion. Of course, if a tax like this was introduced, it wouldn't crash the stock every time a billionaire had to sell their stock. No, it would have crashed the entire market as soon as the tax was announced, maybe wiping off $10 trillion from the equity markets. Wow, good luck trying to put back $10 trillion into the economy. The rich aren't taking money from the poor. They're being rewarded for making people's lives better. Money is not a zero-sum game. If Elon makes an extra $1 million, it doesn't mean that some other people have $1 million less. Wealth is created, not taken. There are very talented people in the world who can make a better life for us. These people need to be in a system that incentivizes them the most. The chance of making $1 billion on the latest Silicon Valley startup aspires many entrepreneurs to work on their startups. The more startups there are, the more businesses come into fruition, which ends up creating more jobs and improving standard of living. These businesses sell products that have made our lives better, improved our standard of living, increased our lifespan, allowed us to connect with friends and families like never before. No, that's not enough. These entrepreneurs haven't done enough for us just through that. So it's only fair that they also give us their money as well. They aren't taking money from the poor to better themselves. They generally make money by also making poor people's lives better too. Through innovation these days, we live like kings from centuries ago. Even of recent, we can now afford to have our own chauffeur, for example, with the likes of Uber. Innovation makes a lifestyle the rich have more affordable for the masses. And the same would apply for real estate. Tax everyone 1% of their property value that exceeds over $1 million, for example. Anyone who is rich enough for a house over $1 million must contribute more to the tax system. This way, the government can target the rich. But again, what happens? Well, it crashes the property market for everyone. Billionaires like Elon Musk may be worth $200 billion or so, but they've paid very little tax in achieving that wealth. Because they achieved it through asset appreciation. They haven't sold their assets yet, so they're not subjected to capital gains tax. The thing is, a lot of founding CEOs actually don't pay themselves a salary, or if they do, then it's likely a very minimal one. Sure, we hear about other CEOs making tens of millions of dollars. Well, they pay tax on that income. But if other CEOs don't pay themselves a salary, then there is no tax to pay. These founders would rather the money was reinvested in growing the business. Elon Musk does receive compensation bonuses though, which I believe he has paid tax on, although I don't think it was that much. Also, a lot of these companies like Tesla haven't been making profits either, so they haven't been paying tax. They're growth companies, reinvesting the profits into growing the business. You only pay tax on profits. Although America is now deciding to copy China in the way that their economy is working, with modern monetary theory, which is a way for the government to spend money without having to tax you. They simply print the money they need, and if inflation looks like it's coming, well, they can't raise interest rates, as everyone, including the government, has too much debt. So to stop inflation, they raise taxes instead. This feels like the last breaths of life of a fiat currency. Despite it being called modern monetary theory, I think it's more like Armageddon monetary theory. We all know fiat currency was not meant to last. It has served as a means of riding out recessions, but has delayed the inevitable hangover. MMT is the government scraping the barrel to find any last value left in the dollar, and then spending it. The US dollar won't go under quickly either. Think of it more like the Titanic sinking compared to a small sailing boat. But just like Tesla is a vastly superior form of auto transport, Bitcoin is a vastly superior currency. Legacy finance absolutely sucks. Bitcoin will facilitate commerce again on so many levels, and particularly in developing nations, where it is so hard and expensive to transfer funds. It will also mean that monetary policy is completely sovereign from the government. Government can't create Bitcoin, they can't control it, they can't adjust interest rates, they can't manipulate currencies either. Governments are great at telling you who your enemy really is, or finding you a boogeyman to blame all the issues on. It's never the government admitting blame. They must deflect the blame. And right now they want you to blame the rich. Well, the reason there is so much inequality is because there is so much debt. Because of the government. It's not the rich. It's not the poor. It's the government. The government want to control things their way. They feel like they always need to be doing something too. They can't just let the economy work out its own natural environment, like an ecosystem in a forest. And their jobs are to intervene, so they have to find ways to intervene and meddle. But the reason we're on so much debt these days, and what's responsible for the inequality, can be traced back to 3 historic events. 1. The Federal Reserve Bank in 1913, with the inception of a central bank in America. 2. The Bretton Woods system. After the war, in 1944, all currencies were backed by US dollars, as the US dollar was already backed by gold. And then in 1971, when Nixon said to the rest of the world that we're no longer backing your US dollars by gold anymore. And that's when we really saw inflation, with the inception of a fiat US currency. The US likely used the likes of Japan or France's gold to pay to go to the moon and fight Vietnam, resulting in the US not having enough gold to pay its debts. I think just before Nixon actually announced the removal of Bretton Woods, France was on its way over with a massive ship to collect all their gold, which is why Nixon made the decision alone without going through Congress or the Senate. It is slowly eroding away the middle class too. The middle class now start their careers with so much debt just from getting a degree. We've become a debt-based society. But the middle class is the backbone of the economy. They are essential. Without them, you are left with the haves and the have-nots, which means you lose democracy. But this is what government has. They have the money printing machines. How are you going to take those from someone? An actual license to print money? Again, it comes down to creative destruction. Fiat currency is over. We're seeing the end of days where government are going to try and do anything they can before it stops working by spending trillions of dollars. And coronavirus has further exacerbated this. This is what the end of fiat currency looks like. Crypto will take over, but there is only one truly decentralized cryptocurrency, and it's Bitcoin. And Tesla may or may not be a monopoly, but Bitcoin definitely will. Basically, it's a lovely idea that we could make the poor people so much wealthier through one easy solution, as long as all our hearts are in the right place and we're doing what sounds the most morally right. Whether it works or not is moot. It's more important to be morally right than factually correct. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In reality, real economics do come into play. I mean, we could just give everyone $1 million too. The government could literally do that if they so chose. But all it would do is just create inflation. Inflation creates more inequality as real assets like stocks and property increase in value and cash decreases in value. The rich have the former and the poor have the latter. This is why investing is about buying and holding. You can bet on inflation. The government's job is to simply try and keep a hold on inflation, whilst also being able to spend as much money as they can, whilst trying to find the right tax balance that will generate the most overall income for them, which is by having a booming economy. You can always make an economy boom more if you lower the interest rates, as money becomes cheaper. Doing that also weakens the nation's currency, which means they will have a larger competitive advantage when it comes to exporting, but imports will cost more too. And then you have to potentially fight inflation again. Yes, there is the whole cronyism side of wealth too, which I absolutely despise, in the rich lobbying to basically stay rich with corrupt politicians. This is the worst. Anyway, I hope this didn't sound like some capitalist cliche that the rich deserve more or anything. If the rich could vote to lose 10% of their wealth and restore the world into a utopia, then I'm sure the majority would do that. But the world is not that simple. This is about addressing the issue of inequality and saying that it's not the rich's fault that they have more money than you. In fact, the rich generally improve your life and standard of living. The blame should be passed on to the US government for using the likes of Japan or France's gold to pay to go to the moon and fight in Vietnam. Two very expensive events. Anyway, this is how I see it, but I'm open to any intelligent views on how else inequality could be improved. But I think the government messing around with monetary policy is the cause, so I don't see how the government can fix it. Remember, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.